Hey, what's going on guys? Acer and John here, and today we're going to be doing a review for Season 14, that being Season of the Splicer. But before we jump into it, I ask you want to keep up to date on all Destiny 2 news, information, links, tutorials, and more, that you can subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, let's jump into it. Just as a warning, I'm going to openly talk about spoilers and leaks in this video, possibly. So if you're not interested in any of that, I would click off the video now. So I guess starting off here, let's go ahead and recap the story of the season. If you remember, the events of the season were kick-started by Zavala letting us know that the Vex were up to something during the end of Guardian Games, and a couple days later we end up being pushed into an endless night in the last city. A big problem with this major threat is that we, as humanity, didn't have any way to deal with this. So because of this, we had to go to Mithrax, the leader of House of Light, a friendly House of Fallen that wishes to praise the great machine, aka the Traveler, with humanity. Anyways, the season kicks off with us going to Europa to find Mithrax. We find him, and then in order for him to help us rid of the endless night, he asks for protection, and that protection comes in the form of taking up the Scourge of the Past final boss area, that being the Basta district in the last city. With that being said, we go through different overrides and expunges, which are part of the main activities for the season, in order to hone our Splicer skills, because Mithrax himself is too weak to go in there and defeat whatever the Vex is controlling all of this. And so us Guardians have to learn how to splice, so that way we can take out the threat ourselves. While this is happening, the representative for humanity, which is chosen to be Lakshmi of the Future War Cult, she ends up using her Vex prediction engine in order to look into the future, and a couple of the futures she sees Mithrax in a city that's on fire. So of course that's a major concern, because Lakshmi also was able to see Gaul before Gaul arrived, and obviously Gaul took away the Guardian's light and almost destroyed humanity. So over the course of the season, Lakshmi ends up building anti-fallen sentiment within humanity. On the other hand, the Guardian representative of the city, that being Saint 14, ends up growing from being one of the Fallen's most feared enemies, because if you don't know, Saint 14 has a history of the Fallen. He used to demolish innocent Fallen for no reason. He just hated them so much. Anyways, during the season, Saint 14 on the other hand ends up growing to like the Fallen of House of Light. And lastly, to make sure nothing goes south between all these colliding groups, we have Osiris, which ends up being a mediator. As the weeks goes on, Saint 14 grows to like the Fallen more. Lakshmi grows to hate the Fallen more and is getting more and more suspicious because it's taking forever to end the endless night. But eventually, Mithrax ends up finding out in one of our expunge missions that this wasn't a plan propagated by the Vex. This was actually set up by Savathun and Quria, the Dreaming Mind. Obviously, that turns a situation that was already super concerning into like a DEFCON 1 situation. Like, this was super concerning. Anyways, through the corrupted expunges that we ended up doing, eventually we made it to Quria, and we killed Quria, and that ends up releasing the last city from the endless night. However, we're not done there, because Lakshmi was still suspicious of the House of Light Fallen. And it does not help at all that Osiris was encouraging these suspicions, and also, suspiciously, Osiris was preventing the Vanguard from being known about a coup that Lakshmi and the factions were trying to stage. Anyways, now cue the epilogue, which ended up releasing today. In this, Lakshmi ends up releasing a Vex invasion on the Elixni Quarter, which she states that Osiris showed her how to do. Anyway, Saint 14 ends up helping Mithrax defend the House of Light Fallen within the Elixni Quarter. Eventually, Ikora, Zavala, and Amanda Holiday come and help out with this, saying that the Elixni of House of Light are welcome in the city. I also forgot to mention that Lakshmi ends up dying while calling the Vex. And because of Lakshmi's death and her failed coup attempt, the remaining Future War cultists dissipate, and New Monarchy and Dead Orbit get together on a giant ship and leave. And with Osiris insinuating treason against the last city, Osiris has fled and is nowhere to be seen, which concludes our seasonal story for Season of the Splicer. Now briefly, I'm going to talk about the gameplay here. We end up seeing the override seasonal activity, which was Gambit without the PvP, essentially. Then we also had expunges, which were weekly story missions, kind of like the Season of Arrival's interference missions. And lastly, we saw the return of the Vault Vault the Glass raid, as well as the launch of the first Master Mode raid in Destiny 2. Out of the way, let's go and talk about my thoughts, starting off with the story here. I thought the story was pretty good. It wasn't as interesting as Season of the Chosens. I will have to say one complaint I did have is the whole racism aspect of the story. It just felt kind of weird, and this was purely from the aspect that it felt kind of undermined by the interjecting of Savathun into the plot, you know, the god of deception. It just comes off as humanity's irrational thoughts about the Fallen weren't real to begin with. I also found it kind of weird how they really never talked about the atrocities the Fallen committed. Anyways, beside those two minor criticisms I had with the story, I still thoroughly enjoyed the story and still felt like it was slightly under the bar of Season of the Chosen story, but it's still up there in terms of good Destiny stories. Next up, let's talk about the gameplay. Honestly, overall, I'm just sort of burned out of seasonal activities, and this is mainly due to the fact that these activities are usually extremely shallow. Now, that doesn't mean Gambit 2.0, aka Override, or Expunges were bad. They definitely were, in my opinion, a good activity. It's just the problem is, I feel like Bungie could better spend their time bringing up some older stuff, making it relevant. Like the Strike playlist, for example, is god-awful in its current state. I feel like it wouldn't be bad if every other season, that being 2 seasons of year, was dedicated to bringing up or giving a facelift to some content that already exists in the game. I mean, the loot was pretty phenomenal and interesting, but it's like, man, I'm really burned out of these seasonal activities. Like, I don't know. I just wish Bungie would spend more time focusing on some more permanent additions to the game rather than focusing on temporary additions to the game. Also, with Vault of Glass, I thought it was pretty damn good. They did a decent job at bringing up the difficulty, at least somewhat, to match Destiny 2. Obviously, it's still Vault of Glass. It's the first raid in the game, so it's pretty simplistic and not that difficult on the normal mode. However, I'd say the hard mode packs quite the punch, is quite the challenge. I enjoy it. Also, the loot for this raid is pretty good. I don't care what anyone says. Fatebringer is fun to use. Vision of Confluence is fun to use. Corrective Measure is fun to use. Hesitant Vengeance fun to use. Praetor's Revenge is fun to use. Found Verdict is occasionally fun to use. And the armor looks amazing. One complaint I do have about the Master Mode is the lack of unique loot to it. I mean, of course, there's the adept weapons, but they're just not that interesting to me. Like, these adept weapons are only slightly better than their normal counterparts, and you only get one per character per week unless you go out and spoil farm, and then you can get multiple more. It just feels weird to only get one per character, especially when there's so many perk combinations. At the bare minimum, the raid should be dropping too, so that's a little irritating. While I do think it's sort of cool that the raid on Master Mode drops stat-focused armor, because while it's quote-unquote high stat rolled, it's the same as every other high stat rolled armor source, and I can pretty much get the same exact results from using seasonal currency in the helm, making it not that unique. I was like, come on, Bungie, another raid seal, which requires no flawless raid to be completed. In my opinion, doing a flawless raid should be part of the base seal, the clan triumph should be removed from the base seal, and doing the challenge mode of the raid on Master Mode should gild the raid title. I think that would be pretty cool, and add some replayability to lesser played raids, if you had the ability to gild raid titles via completing challenges on Master Mode. Overall, I thought this season was a good season for a season. I feel like most of my gripes with the seasonings at this point come from the seasonal model itself. And to be more specific, I feel like the seasonal model is immensely suffering from having a brand new, very shallow activity created every single season. I feel like the game as a whole would benefit way better if we had at least half the seasons each year dedicated to pumping content and depth into things that already exist in the game. Anyways, that was my thoughts on Season of the Splicer, aka Season 14 of Destiny 2. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. If you enjoyed, go ahead and give a like. The Witch Queen reveal is coming up on 24th, so make sure you're subscribed for that, as I'll try to be covering as much as I can, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.